Hello, this is Pat Baker, and we're going to do a little walkthrough of our username generator homework assignment. And I have pulled up some starting code here, and you can see that the goal was to produce two usernames with some string data that you're going to prompt the user for, and that would be the first name, their last name, and their birth year. And those were all strings, and from those three pieces of data, you were going to create a username 1 and a username 2 based on a general formula. So those first three lines of code are just prompting the user for their first name and last name and birth year and putting that data into those string variables. The first usernames, essentially their formula, is what I have highlighted right here. You need to get the second character. You're concatenating that with a $sign, getting the last two digits of the birth year. So you're concatenating all of these items and generating a random number between 1 and 100. So let's make sure we have, if we're going to use the random number generator, there's our random class and object created, so we're good to go there. We can go ahead and use that. And I'm pretty sure yep, random has been imported. So these all have to do with strings, these first couple parts of the formula. So let's take a look at a slide that just reminds us how strings work in Java. I have the slide pulled up from part of the slides that you were to review for this module. And in this example, our string is just a name and we've assigned it the word hello. And when you create a string in Java, it automatically has assigned indices with every one of the characters in the string. And the indices start with 0, as you can see with the word hello. So this is a good example of the methods that you're going to need to create your username. These are all string methods, and because name is a string object, it can invoke those methods. So to get the length of the string, which is the number of characters, we're going to call the length method. That's going to return an integer, and it looks like we're putting it into a variable called value. Notice the length, or the number of characters of the string, is 5. The indices go from 0 to 4. That's the first example. The second example that's going to be helpful for you is using substring. And substring, by definition, if you pass it two parameters, this is the starting index up to, but not including this index. So starting at 0 up to, but not including 3. So we get HEL. You can also call substring by passing it just one parameter, and what that means is start at this index and just give me everything else in the string. So we're starting in this example at index 2, and it's going to return everything else that's in the string, so LLO in our case. This last example is going to return a character at that index. So we could, in this case, we want to return the character that's at index 1. And we do that with char at and then pass it the index. This does return a character. You could accomplish this same task by using substring. And if you just wanted to return this letter at this index, the starting index would be 1 for your substring up to, but not including 2. So that would be 1 comma 2 would return an E as a string. And sometimes that's a little more straightforward. So let's look at the next slide because I believe it has yes. Okay, so this is the other method that you're going to need to use in your homework assignment. And that is, let's just display a string as uppercase. So we're going to invoke the method toUpperCase. So I think those are the methods that are the most helpful for you in this assignment. So let's go back and look at our code. All right, so when I look at this formula, I already have some ideas on how to tackle this. The second character I could get with char at, or I could get with a substring. I'm going to concatenate it with a $sign, the last two digits, because we made birth year a string, we can use substring. You always know the year is 4 characters. That makes it kind of nice. You're going to display the last name in uppercase. You saw how to do that, and we're going to generate our nice random number. So let's take a look at how I handled that. So I'm building up the string just by concatenating. So the plus sign when you're working with strings says just put those items together, going from left to right. So we're going to take the letter at index 1, which is the second character, because remember our indices start with a 0. Concatenate it with the $sign. If I start my birth year at substring 2, that means, let's say I was born in 2010. Well, the 2 is at indices 0, the 0 is at indices 1, and the 10 would start at indices 2. So once I start at indices 2 and call substring, it's going to go ahead and give me the rest of the string. So that would work. Let's see, we're just converting the last name to all uppercase just for display purposes. The string actually doesn't change. And then this is a good review of random numbers. Remember, when you are generating an integer and you use this method and pass it a number, this will generate random numbers in the range 0 through 99. And we're going to go ahead and shift that range by 1. So we'll get 1 through 100. So that looks good. Let's go ahead and look at the second username, which was a little sneakier. And let's talk about that for a minute. So the second user name is going to be made up of the following components. The first 2 characters of the first name. We know we can do that with substring. You know how to get the length of the first name. We're concatenating. This is the tricky one, the last 2 characters of the last name, because you don't know how long somebody's last name is. It could be 10 characters or it could be 8 characters. So you don't know what the starting index is. It's not like the birth year where you knew that a year always has 4 characters. So we'll talk about that, and I'll talk a little bit more about the strategy there. The hint that I gave you is that the length does come in handy here. And then we'll look at the random number, generating a number between 50 and 75. So let's go ahead and start building this string up. So I've got the first 3 really components of the second user name, the substring that's going to give me the first 2 characters, because that will essentially be starting at index 0 up to, but not including the character that's at index 2. So that would return the characters that are at index 0 and 1. That's one of the reasons the names had to be 3 characters or more. This will return the number of characters in the first name, excuse me, and then we'll concatenate it with the $sign. Okay, but here we come to the interesting part, right here, the last 2 characters of the last name. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at some examples to see if you can see what the correlation is. All right, so I made a couple slides here to have us look at the correlation between the length of a string and where you need to start your substring if you want the last 2 characters. So again, we're back to hello, and the length of the string is 5. And if we want the last 2 characters of the string, then we're going to start our indice at 3, and you don't have to put a second indice, because by definition this goes from 3 to the end of the string. So the length is 5 and the starting index is 3. So let's look at the next example. So we got another last name, Lincoln, and the length of Lincoln is 7. These are the indices there. And we want to start for the last 2 characters. We want our starting index to be 5. In other words, what's the relationship between the length and the starting index? So the length is 7, the starting index is 5. And in the previous example, the length is 5 and the starting index is 3. So let's see, how do we take that relationship and put it into code? All right, so we just determined that the length minus 2 is going to be our starting index. So in the case of if my last name was Lincoln, this would have been a 7. So 7 minus 2 will have our starting indice be 5. So that is how we do that. Notice we've got embedded inside substring another method that returns the length, but all this does is just return a number. And we take that number and subtract 2 from it. Okay, and the last part of this one is generating a random number between 50 and 75. So let's look at how we did that, and let's look at this first part. This first part is going to generate a range by definition of 0 to 25, and all we're doing is shifting that by 50. So 0 to 25 becomes 50 to 75. Okay, and now that you've got your two usernames, the last step was just to display those and tell us the length. So there's the usernames and then the length of our final username. Let's run it and see if it works. So maybe I'll put the Luke Skywalker example in. And what do we have Luke's birthday as? 1987. And let's see what we get. Okay, so the one that's of interest here, you're not going to get the same random numbers, is this one right here where we're plucking out those last two letters there. So let's run it and see if it works with like George Washington. I don't know, what year would George Washington be born? I don't know, let's think about that for a minute. All right, I sort of cheated there and did a little quick Google search of when George Washington was born, and he was born in 1732. So let's see what our two usernames are for George. And again, this is the interesting one. It's pulling out those last two characters of Washington. So hopefully this walkthrough was helpful. You can go ahead and compare your code to this example. And the things to take away from this are how to use substring, how to use the random number generator, and how to concatenate.